So I sent you in the email a couple of things to look at because we're going to be following a particular exam paper for examples, but we're looking at the different questions, of course. So hopefully you should see an exam paper in front of you now. If you can't, shout out, please. So this is the insert for paper 2. It's bulkier than the one you got on paper 1 because obviously you have 2 pieces of writing to read. The paper 2 is called Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives. That's what this one is about. It's about the writers, much more than on paper 1. This is about the viewpoints and the perspectives of the 2 different writers writing about, of course, the same theme. So they're roughly writing about the same theme, although it will be in different forms. So you won't get 2 texts which are the same. You won't get 2 articles or 2 diaries. You'll get different forms, but the writers are dealing with the same theme. So in this particular example, you have 2 sources. One is 20th century nonfiction. It gives you the title and it tells you that it's an extract from a book printed in 1997. It's worth knowing that it's an extract from a book, that it's not a diary, it's not a letter. You need to know what it is, because it does change the way that you're going to understand what you're reading. And source B will always be the 19th century piece. So it's the 19th century literary non-fiction, and it's an extract from a diary. So I'm going to drop back out again of the sharing just to let a couple more people in.
Good evening.
Good evening. Hello. You're all in.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
lovely.
Sorry for late.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go back into sharing again. Okay. We're just started to look at paper 2. This is the insert for a particular paper 2 that you've probably seen before. But basically, do take the information you need from this bit. So the first one is a book. It's an extract from a book, a non-fiction book, of course, true story. And the other one is an extract from a diary. They're telling you that. That's information they're giving you. You don't have to guess it. One of them was in 1997. The other is 130 years earlier in 1867. So that's the comparison you're making. You're making a comparison between these 2 different texts. That's important. So then when you turn over the page, you get source A. Remember, on the top of each source, just like you had on paper 1, but now you've got 2 sources, you will get a box. The box, remember, is not part of the text. It is not the thing that the writer wrote. This is given to you by the examiners. It's background detail and it gives you context. So here it tells you what the writer is doing. He's a British climber. He's with his team. He's attempting to scale Mount Everest. He's at base camp 1,000 feet below them is his colleague Audrey. And she's the first to see the approaching storm. So it's going to be about a storm up Mount Everest. You've got 2 points of view, Audrey down below and Matt higher up the mountain. So this does just give you a feeling of exactly where you are and where the narrative voice is coming from on this particular piece of writing. The other one, which is the literary nonfiction, is called literary nonfiction because it's written much more as if it were an exciting and complete piece of literature, like more like the writing you get on paper 1. It is still, however, non-fiction, although the writer is using lots of colorful language features, painting images. It is still non-fiction because it's based on his observations of a real event. And in the box this time, Arthur Munby kept a diary in the 1800s, and in these extracts taken from January 1867, he describes London in the snow. So we are being given, there's very little to illuminate it. It just sets the context of the two pieces of writing. So I'll stop sharing and I share again. I hope everybody's in. Okay. So those are your two texts. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at the text because it's not going to be a worked example. I want you to look really at the questions and what you need to do in order to answer them. So let's look at question 1. Now I'm hoping when I do this, it's not going to go mad. Can you see the question paper now? Question 1. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Because I can't see you. I can only see my screen. Thank you very much.
Oh,
Yeah. So at the moment we've got, so there's question 1. And at this point, I'm going to, we'll just remind you what question 1 looks like on paper 2. You are given 4 statements and you've got to find, you're given 8 statements and you've got to find the 4 which are true. 4 are true, 4 are false. And you are only looking for your answers at the lines they specify. So you've got to go to source A and you're only looking at lines 1 to 12. Be very careful you don't look outside of that, whatever it says there, because you might find one of the answers outside, but that's not the point. It's just in lines 1 to 12. You choose 4 statements which are true. That's what you are doing. There is this system, because this question is marked by a machine, by a computer, and it won't be marked by a human being unless you make a mistake. Basically, it tells you what you should do. So if you think A is one of the true statements, you've got to shade in the ellipse. They call it a circle, but it's not really a circle. It's an ellipse. Just that area in the middle, and you shade it in with your black pen. Completely shade in that, not outside of the circle. You choose a maximum of 4 statements. I would say do 4, even if one of them's a guess. It may be right, but don't do 5. Don't do more than 4. On paper 1, you could write as many as you liked. You would get up to 4 marks. In this one, if you put 5 in, the machine will mark from the top down the first 4 answers. It will ignore the others. So there's nothing to be gained by putting that. And what you might do actually by adding an extra is you might make the machine miss one of your right answers. So only 4 answers on this that you should mark. However, we're all human. If you decide, actually, no, that's wrong, that's an error, then it says, if you make an error, cross out the whole box. So basically, whoop, whoop, with a cross, okay? And then you just simply shade in the one you think is right. So it's all right having 4 marked as long as one of them's got a cross through. Sorry, if you've got 5, if one of them's got a cross through, that's fine. They will ignore that one and just look at the 4 that you have put. If you change your mind again, and it can happen, and actually think, no, it was right after all, then what you do is you put a circle around it, because you crossed it out before and now you put a circle around it and you put a cross through the one that you don't want, and now they will look at it again. Now, because that really is tricky and it can get messy, I think what a lot of people do is, to start with, they'll just put a circle around the A, B, C, D. Yeah. So if you think A is right, put a circle around it. You think C is right, put a circle around it, and so on. But that won't count as an answer. When you've got 4 you're happy with, then you have to fill in the boxes. You have to fill in the circles. But if you've done it there and you're happy, then you won't be making mistakes probably when you fill in the circles. Okay. Now, is everybody clear about that? Is there any questions about how you fill in this?
no, it's okay.
Okay. If you do sort of think, oh no, what do I do now? Just put your hand up. That's what the invigilator is there to advise you on. The invigilator can't help you with the questions, but they can help you with the technicalities of the paper. So if you do make a mistake, just put your hand up straight away. Don't sit and worry about it. Stick your hand up, get one of the invigilators over and get them to help you sort it out. So I want to have a look now at what the examiners say about this question. So that means the other document I sent you was a sheet that I produced based on meetings that we had with actual examiners, including the chief examiner for English at AQA. So some of the things they said there are not on the papers. They're not in the official guidance from AQA, but they are things that the examiner has shared with us, and so that's why these are interesting. So looking at the paper as a whole, first of all, there was general notes about keeping focused on what you need to do for the question. You can reuse quotes and examples. You can reuse the quotes and examples. Don't reuse what you say about them. You can just use the same quotes and examples in question 2. You can use them again in question 4. Or if you've talked about a piece of a language feature in question 3, you can talk about that as a method in question 4. Okay, don't worry about having to find completely fresh ones for each question. You don't have to. They are not recommending that candidates work backwards, starting with question 5 and going back, because they have designed the paper to move forwards progressively. However, this is what they said. In paper 2, think about your attack strategy. There is some merit, that's what they said, some merit, in answering question 1, then going on to question 3, and then going back to do question 2 and question 4. The reason for this, this is just talking about section A. You can still do your question 5 before you attack question section A if you like. But when you're looking at section A, there are 2 questions that only talk about one of the texts. Then there are 2 questions that deal with both of them at the same time, and you have to do comparisons. So it just makes sense in some ways, and if it makes sense to you, that's fine. If it doesn't, don't do this. But if it does make sense to you, have a look at question 1. It will probably say, in source A, find the 4 correct or 4 true statements. That means for question 1, you only need to be looking at source A. Then if you look at question 3, almost always, I'm not going to say always, but almost always, question 3 will be about the other source, usually the 19th century one, because it's got richer language. So question 3 will probably be about source B. And you can read source B whilst you're thinking about question 3, underline bits and so on. And by the time you've finished question 3, you will have looked at both of those sources in some detail. So you'll be finding facts in source A for question 1, and you've been finding language and talking about the language and meaning in question 3 for source B, hopefully. There are papers, we've had papers where they've actually just talked about source A in both of them, and that's a bit mean, but usually if that's what they're doing, and you have to read the questions to make sure, but if that's what they're doing, it may make sense to do question 1 and then question 3, and then you now have a working understanding of both of the texts, and you can go back to doing the comparison on question 2, and then of course the comparison on question 4. So it might be reasonable to do it that way. Okay, I hope I haven't confused you. If that makes sense, then it might be worth trying. If it doesn't make sense to you, forget it. I never said anything. Okay. So for the examiners, they say more or less exactly what I've said. There's one thing that is neat to know, and that is the statements on question 1, as they go down the page, are in order of where they are mentioned in the text. So if you look at if you look at A, that will be near the beginning of the section. And if you look at E or F, it'll be down there towards the end of the section. And that's a nice way of finding your way through it. So when you're checking them to see if they're correct or not, you know where to look. You're looking at the top of the text section for statements A, B, C, and then as it goes further on, you're looking further down that section. Another thing to say about question 1, we haven't got a lot to say about question 1. Obviously, it's only worth 4 marks, but they're 4 marks that you should be absolutely definitely getting. And the only reason you won't get it is because you misread either the statement or the text itself, or you're tricked by one of their trick answers, and they do put in at least one trick answer. The trick answer in this case was gotten it. I can't remember now. You'd have to read it to see which one's the trick answer. But basically, this is, yeah, go on. Is it G? They watched as the storm got closer to them. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at the. Well, let's have a look.
Did you say that lady was at the bottom and then they were further up? That's it.
That's right. Yes. So it's lines 1 to 12.
Yeah.
So if we look at 1 to 12, so it is the beginning. So it's just down to that's the wrong one, isn't it? Don't look at the wrong source. There's a good tip for you. Make sure you're looking at the right source. So basically, she says, glancing into the sky, she became one of the first people, the very first, to see what was sweeping up from the lower valleys. Yeah, no, she does see it as it comes towards her. Yeah. I don't know. Base camp is a cozy and a happy place? No. Now, look at that. At 5,360 meters, base camp is a cheerless place at the best of times. Shivering with cold. Yeah. So it is not a happy and comfortable place to be. Cheerless is obviously the opposite to cozy and happy. Chilly is also the opposite to cozy, isn't it? So that's wrong. So having just said that the examiners promise you that the top one is going to be near the beginning, they actually, that's an example of it, isn't it? So because it's right there in the first 5 words of the text. Got you? So you just look there and say, nope, cheerless, obviously, not cozy, not happy, bang, that's wrong. And there are 2 ways of doing this. Either find the 4 which you think are true, or find the 4 you know are false. Because once you know one is false, you can cross it off and move on. It's now you're choosing 4 out of 7. That's better odds. If you can get rid of any of them straight away, then you're increasing your odds, even if you're only guessing, and you shouldn't be just guessing. But that's a way of doing it. If you are left with 5 possibles, and that can happen because you might be looking at the trick question. If you are looking at 5, look at them and think, can that be wrong? Rather than can that be right? Try and falsify one of them or 2 of them to see if you can eliminate one of them. And once you've eliminated one, then you've got 4 left. You're only meant to spend about 10 minutes on this. Some people can do this much faster. As you're reading through that text, you can be, with these questions next to you, you can start underlining the bits you think tell you the answers. If you can get it done in 5 or 6 minutes, so much the better. Okay. Any questions about that? We'll move on to question 2. So question 2 is looking at source A and source B. Okay, you are in this case looking at the whole of the sources, source A and source B. So that's why it would be handy to have already read both sources before you do this question. The effects of the weather on people in both sources are very different. Use details from both sources to write a summary of the different ways people are affected by the weather. So the question is actually asking you to find evidence in the text. Okay, you're being asked to find evidence in the text to show the different ways that people are affected by the weather. You're not talking about the storm. You're not talking about the, what's happening, to the tents. It's how are people affected by the weather. Be very careful about identifying that last bit of the text, that last bit of the question. That's the important bit. Otherwise, you won't be comparing the same things. So, welcome to whoever's just come in. I'm going to look at a different thing now, just to remind you a little bit about how we answer this question. It's not the one. Wait. Sorry about that. So just to remind you how we answer these questions, remember, those of you who were with me for this one, you're asked to write a summary of differences between the same aspect of the two texts. So in the one we've just looked at, it was the way that weather affects the people. In this one, it was how the differences between the two men who are mentioned in the story, in the two articles. But it may not be differences. It can be similarities. Okay, the most of the examples that we have are about differences, but the examiners have made it clear, and we have had examples of this, there are times when they make it similarities. So they're going, find similarities between the surfboards in 1960s California and 1740s Hawaii. It's a different it's a different question. So you're looking for the similarity, the details that give you similarities rather than the details that give you differences. So don't think it has to be differences. It usually is, but it doesn't have to be. You're asked to write a summary of factual differences or similarities. A summary means that you're putting it in your own words. Okay. It's the most important thing is to find these differences or similarities and then put them into your own words as a comparison. So in text A, this and this, but in text B, that and that. You will need to put a bit of the text, a reference to the text, either a quote or a line number, in order to show evidence where you got that from, where you got your answer from. And you will need to identify meanings. That's all you're picking out. You're picking out factual meanings in the text. But the more implicit, the more implied, the less obvious those differences are or those similarities are, the more marks you're going to get, because that's a more sophisticated comparison. Don't go for the absolutely obvious. Summary writing, which is what you're doing in this particular question. It's nothing to do with analyzing language or talking about the effect on the audience. You do not need to do that in this question. All right. You will take a quote from the text maybe, but that is showing where your ideas have come from. It's evidence. It's not to be analyzed. Summarizing means retelling in your own words. And then you back up your points with quotations. Don't analyze them. Just choose quotations which prove your point. You need to summarize the differences or the similarities between whatever it was they wanted you to do from the two sources. You do not summarize the whole sources, just the thing that you're talking about. So in this case, the effects of the weather on the people. Or in the one we've just looked at, the differences or similarities between the two men in the two different sources. Those are the only things you need to summarize, not the whole paper, not the whole of the text. And the more perceptive you can be about that, the less obvious you are in picking out your points, the better. Okay. So it might be that you'll choose to use P paragraphs, or what I call a double P, because you're going to make a point about text A, and then explain your point, evidence with a quote, and then you're going to go make a point about text B, and explain your point and evidence with a quote. You end up with a double P paragraph. Make a point about source A, explain it in your own words, you summarize it, evidence with a quote, and then you're going to say, well, in contrast, or on the other hand, or however, if it's a difference you're looking for, and then you go on to source B instead. If it were similarities, you say, it's going to be something like, the writer in source A also, or as well as, or similarly, yeah. So if it's differences, it's going to be in contrast, or on the other hand, or however, or but between the two. And if it's similarities, it's going to be also, or as well, or similarly. And if you do that 3 times, you should cover all the marks available. Any questions on this so far?
No, thank you.
Okay.
No.
No, good. Or if you've got questions, you can save them up. But I wanted to have a look now at an answer to this question. So the effects of the weather on people in both sources are very different. Okay. The effects of the weather on people. So you're using both sources to write a summary of the different ways people are affected by the weather. So question 2, here's an answer. And I'm not going to look at the simplest answer. So if we look at this answer, so what does it say? Firstly, in source A, the weather is described as life-threatening and dangerous. This is because of the quote, the apocalyptic vision crept silently and swiftly towards them. So they're making a point. The weather is life-threatening and dangerous. And their evidence is it's apocalyptic. Yes, and it's coming towards them. No need to explain that, and that's fine. But they do go into explanation. The adjective apocalyptic has connotations with things like the end of the world. This shows that weather could have a very bad effect on people as it has been described like this. You don't need to explain the word apocalyptic, but you're not going to have points taken away. But the basic bit here is this shows that the weather will have a very bad effect on people. Remember, you're being asked to find the different ways people are affected by the weather. So in source A, very bad effect, dangerous effect, and so on. Yeah. Also in source A, go on, somebody wants to say something?
Yes, Graham, I would like to, because I can't see it now, but the part describing adjective, it looks like a language analysis.
It does, yes, and that is not necessary.
Okay, so it's
Yeah,
no point
so
for doing
no,
it. Okay.
exactly. So you could have just left that bit out and just go straight onto this shows that the weather would have a very bad effect on people. I mean, they've put it in their belts and braces. They're not going to lose marks. What are they going to lose if they do this too much?
Time. They lose time.
Yeah. And of course, time could lose you marks. So if you're writing stuff you don't need to write, you're going to lose time. So it doesn't hurt, but on the other hand, if there were lots of this, if there were whole chunks of stuff you don't need, that will waste your time. Yeah. So it makes a reasonable stab at this. The idea that it's life-threatening, dangerous. Yeah, the effect on the people is going to be bad. And the reason is because of this image, the apocalyptic vision crept silently and swiftly towards them. So fair enough, it's linked to a bit of the text. We can all agree that apocalyptic is usually not very good. It's not a good thing. And so that would be a reasonable paragraph of an answer there. Let's just have a look at one more example from them. Also in source A, there is a quote, "The total of 8 fatalities made this the greatest loss of life in any 24-hour period." I don't think you needed a great long quote like that. Quotes should be shorter. The total of 8 fatalities does what they want. What they're basically saying is the weather can kill you. That's the effect it can have on people. It can kill you. Yes? That's the point. They don't need the rest of that quote. So the part greatest loss of life shows how people have been affected by the storm, as many people have died because of it, which is negative. Well, yeah, I'd say so. If people are dying, it's negative. Yeah. So again, they're making a point that in source A, the effect of the weather is deadly. And there's a quote for you, the total of 8 fatalities. Bingo. That shows how dangerous the storm is. The effect is deadly. There's a much easier and quicker way of saying it than they have. So for that, they got half marks. They got half marks. They got 4 out of 8. So one statement to show a difference in the ways people are affected by the weather in both texts. The response could have been improved by identifying more than one difference in the ways the people in each text are affected by the weather. So when they get to source B, so they do, both of those paragraphs are about source A. Then they do source B. On the other hand, in source B, the effects of the weather people is shown as more positive and not a danger to someone's life. This is because of the quote, "Nothing could ever be more beautiful." This shows that the weather is harmless and beautiful. Well, that is one comparison. They are basically comparing the dangerousness and fatality of the weather to people in source A with the everything's lovely and happy in source B. And in fact, what they've done there is they've not fully looked through source B, because source B does have that stuff about how lovely and pretty and wonderful the London looks in the snow, but it also then talks about a girl who's living homeless, and she's on the point, you know, she actually is being threatened. Her life is being threatened, not as dangerous as the one, you know, up Mount Everest, and she can be helped, and people, you know, there are shelters, there's you know, he can give her some money and help her, unlike the people who died at Mount Everest, but it isn't 100% as straightforward as that. And that's what the examiners are saying here. There's only one comparison. And with only one comparison about the danger or lack of danger of the weather, they can only give half marks. Okay, so try at the very least to compare, to make 2 specific and different comparisons between the 2 texts, whether you're comparing similarities or differences.
Sorry, Graham, is that 2 for each source, you mean? 2 for
Well,
each
I'm talking about, no, what I'm,
Oh.
well, yeah, what I'm saying is make 2 comparisons. To make a comparison between 2 texts, you have to talk about both texts. So you're saying the effects of the weather in source A are deadly,
Yeah.
whereas the effects of the weather in source B are not so deadly. In fact, they can be really lovely and can be quite beautiful. then
Yep.
go on to another comparison, which has nothing to do with the danger or deadliness of it.
No, that's a bit confusing. Sorry. So what did they do wrong here? Sorry.
Right.
Because they did do that, didn't they?
Okay, it's all right. We need to make it quite clear. No, they didn't.
Yeah. Right. Okay. No. I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing with you. Sorry. I didn't
Have a
mean
look
it
at
like
source
that.
A.
Yeah.
Paragraph 1.
Yeah.
Source A, the weather is described as life-threatening and dangerous. Paragraph 2, a total of 8 fatalities, greatest loss of life. So again, they're making the same point twice, that the effect of the weather in source A is deadly and dangerous. Deadly and dangerous. And then they say, on the other hand, in source B, it's not a danger to life because nothing could ever be so beautiful. It's shown as harmless. That is only one comparison. They've taken 3 paragraphs to do one comparison. And then they've written a kind of a conclusion, which is not necessary and is a waste of time. What they needed to do was 1 paragraph about how deadly the storm was. And then on the other hand, 1 paragraph about how beautiful and, enjoyable the snow was in London as a contrast. And then move on to something else, a different comparison, a different difference, if you like. Yeah. Don't do the same comparison twice. And because they've only done 1 comparison, they can only get half marks. Now, half marks aren't bad on this question. Getting 4 is fine, as long as you only took 5 or 6 minutes on it. If you've spent the whole 10, 12 minutes on it and you only get 4 marks, that's not good. That's not good. So is everybody clear why this isn't a good answer? Let's move up the line a little bit. This one gets 5 marks. That's no good. We won't go with 5 marks. Let's have a look at this one. Right, this one gets the full 8 marks. So let's have a look at that. In source A, the weather is shown to affect people very severely and causes death. For example, the greatest loss of life at the peak. This shows that the storm in source A was so severe that it actually caused fatalities. It also shows the overwhelming effect that it had physically on the people. The phrase, not a single lead mark was visible through the raging whiteout, shows that the disorientation caused by the weather. The fact that experienced climbers were so disorientated and lost by the storm shows that the weather can have a serious effect on anyone. We know that some of the climbers who died were experienced, or at least whatever they're going to say. This shows that nature in the form of weather can still have severe consequences for those trying to be prepared. Now, there's far too much being written here for this answer, and a lot of it has got nothing to do with this making this point. But it is at least addressing 2 different points. This is about the deadliness of the weather. This is about the disorientating effects of the weather. So the weather can kill you, and this one is about the weather. The weather can blind you. It can make you lose your way. It can make you lose the lead marks, so they don't know where they're going. So it can trick the climbers. So those are 2 different things. You can see that that's 2 different effects. And then we go into comparing it to source B. The weather is shown to have a much less serious effect, not harmless, less serious effect on people. For instance, enjoying the wondrous scene shows that the weather has actually been appreciated by some people. Yeah. The effects of the weather are much more trivial and less harmful. My beard froze. Yeah. The phrase "as cold as a frog" shows that it's more of a minor problem. Also emphasizes the effects of the writer as negligible in comparison to the death and suffering in source A. So the statements here show the different ways people are affected by the weather in both texts are perceptive throughout and several perceptive inferences are made with judicious selection of textual details. The use of comparative words and phrases such as much more trivial and much less harmful help the candidate to effectively synthesize the differences. So she's making judgments, comparative judgments between the two of them. So the weather is much more harmful in source A and much more trivial in source B. Okay. Any questions about question 2 before I go to look at what the examiners said about it? Which is what we'll do now.
So, Graham, we have to find 2 differences.
Well, as ever, the ideal would be 3.
Okay.
Yeah. However, as you can see, 2 very good, well sourced, well explained examples from each can get you full marks. Can get you full marks. Yeah. Okay. And these are quite obvious. There's nothing too subtle about that first one. People are dying up that mountain because of the storm. That's not subtle. So they can be quite obvious, but I suppose the losing the visibility, so that they're losing their way, and she's using the word disorientation, that's a little bit more subtle, but you don't need to use the big word. You can just put it in your own words. Okay, so 2 examples, if they're good, can get you the full marks. If in doubt, add in another example, but watch your time. It's all about watching your time, isn't it? So just going back to the examiner's advice on paper 2. First of all, as I said, the question can be about comparing differences or similarities, and make sure you've read the question to find it out. Put an underlining underneath differences or similarities. Put a circle around it. Make sure you know what you're looking for. You could focus on 3 differences or similarities. Don't need to do more. And as we've just seen, 2 really well done ones can be enough. It's about quality, not quantity. The emphasis is on comparison. So use words that overtly relate to comparison. Both of them do this. Source A does that, while source B does another. However, in contrast, on the other hand, also, similarly, those sorts of words that show that you are talking about them both, you're making a comparison between one and the other. Higher level candidates will be expected to talk about inference. Okay, and so something you've read between the lines that's an effect of the weather. It might be about the mood of the narrator. That the weather coming in can actually make the person change their mood. Happens in both of the texts, but that's quite subtle. And you can actually, use that. It's an inference to make sure that the examiners know that you're making an inference. There's no harm in actually saying, by this I infer, yeah, or I can make the inference that, just to show that you're making an inference, just in case they miss it. It's pretty easy to get half marks on this question, and much harder to get the higher marks. They acknowledge that. The higher marks in this question are designed for the higher level candidates. The most important thing, they say, is clarity. That's being clear. Express clearly what you are saying. Okay? And you should plan it. Now, they're talking about, actually, you could even write a little plan on the paper if you want to. I would say it's about underlining things, or putting arrows between things on the on your on your sheet, on the actual texts, because you can use colors on the text. You can underline this bit in green and on one, and that bit in green on the other one, and those are the bits you're going to compare. But you can write a plan. There are also different ways you can make a clear attempt on this answer. I don't see why. I don't know if anybody ever does it, but you could just put source A, source B side by side and put a line down the middle, and actually put them next to each other down the page. This is what happens in source A, this is what happens in source B. So as long as it's clear, the examiners will credit it. Okay. And be aware, this question is about factual differences or factual similarities. It's not about the language that the writer has used. It's not about the opinions of the writer. It's just simply about factual differences or factual similarities. That's all it's about. You are comparing them across between the two.
Graham, can I just ask a quick question then? If you're inferring or making an assumption, that's not necessarily factual, is it?
Well, you were saying it's a fact.
Stop me.
I
see what you mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're saying it's a fact that their mood changed because they saw the storm. So the storm can change somebody's psychological mood. And then you're saying, and that happens in this quote. That's your reading of that quote. But it's still a factual statement to say their mood was changed by the weather. A fact is something that can either be true or false. Yeah, it's not a matter of opinion. It's either true or it's false.
Yeah.
So you can have
yeah.
an incorrect fact, but it's still a factual statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll share and we'll go on to question 3. So you've had question 3 before because it's the language question. It's the same question as you get on the paper last week for question 2. So the language question. So on this paper, the language question, how does the writer use language to describe the storm? It was obvious it was going to be that, wasn't it? So how does the writer use language to describe the storm? The most important part of this question is that bit at the end. Yeah, that bit. And I would underline it. Make sure you know you're only looking for language examples that do that. You're not looking for nice bits of language which talk about the girl or talk about the mountain or talk about this, the sky. It is describe the storm. That's it. If you're not talking about language, that is words and phrases that describe the storm, you are not answering the question. If you're writing about anything else. Is that totally clear? So one of the ways you can lose marks on this question is to just start talking about language, but you haven't talked about language that does that. You're talking about just language generally. You have to make it link to the question. So hopefully we don't need to go into too much detail about how you do that. I will do if you want me to, but let's have a look at an example from the text, from the this bank of answered questions. We won't look at the truly poor ones. This one is a good one. It gets 5 marks out of 8. Oh, it gets 5 marks out of 12. So it was 8 marks on paper 1. It's 12 marks on paper 2. There are more marks to get. The reason that there are more marks to get is because, again, they're giving you, we're giving higher level candidates, the ones that are looking for, grade 9, 8, 7. And this is where they could actually boost their marks by going deeper into the analysis of the language and the explanation of the language, not by giving more examples. You should stick to doing 3 examples and going deeper into your analysis. That's what they're looking for. So let's look at this one. The writer uses adjectives and verbs like ripping, blinding, and engulfing to show how devastating the weather is. So as an opening statement, yeah, that seems to be pretty good. The quote is appropriate. Ripping, blinding, and engulfing. That's saying that that is what the storm does. Yes. So the storm, it does. And these are actually, they're all verbs in this case. So it's not about adjectives, but these are verbs. Ripping, blinding, engulfing are all verbs in this case. It's what the storm is doing. The quote, the tense in a blinding fury of driving snow, the noun fury suggests that something serious is happening, like a snowstorm. The writer has chosen this word to show an emotion from the weather. Now, that is quite weak. The reason it's weak is because it doesn't really address the meaning of the word fury. Really, it's a noun. Great. At the end of the day, fury has a lot more meaning to it, and they don't go into the meaning. It's not this thing about something serious is happening. What does it mean, fury? So if the wind and the storm is showing fury, fury is an emotion that only living things can show. Humans and animals can be furious, can't they? So if they attack with fury, then that is showing their anger and their viciousness, and that's what you want to see here. To hell with whether it's a noun or not. It's the word fury. Is personification for a start, if you want to use a fancy term, because obviously the storm cannot feel emotions. It's not alive in that sense. But it's being made as if it's alive, being made into a monster that rips and blinds and engulfs and shows fury towards the climbers. That would be a more effective way of explaining the language. Saying something like something serious is happening. What is happening? I've got to guess. Don't. This is very nebulous, and neither one thing nor the other, and that's why almost none of that gets a mark. Not almost none of it, because it's not actually saying anything. The writer has chosen this word to show an emotion from the weather, but what emotion? And what the point is, weather doesn't show emotion, so it's metaphorical, isn't it? It's imagery. You're using imagery to do what? You're meant to be talking about the imagery, not just saying that the writer's done it. So look at another one. Another quote to describe the storm is the storm took control. Right. So, I'll admit somebody. Don't quite know. Are you in? So I'll reshare. I think maybe somebody dropped out. Kwasi, have you got a question? Kwasi?
Hello?
You got your hand up, that's all. Sorry.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if the language of question 1 is the same as question 2. The reason
You mean paper 1, paper 2?
Sorry, paper 1.
Yeah.
Question 2. Yeah.
Okay.
If it's the reason, it's the same thing. The reason they brought it back to paper 2. Is there any particular reason?
The reason is that it is probably the most core question, because it's, we're doing the English language GCSE, and this is the question which is about how people use language. The other questions are all very well, how do we structure things? Can you get meaning from a text? Can you understand what a writer is doing? But these are the questions which actually go into analyzing the way language works. It's absolutely central. So they put aside 16 marks on the paper, on both papers, between them. No, it's not. It's 20. So you got 20 marks in total for how does language work? How do you actually? How does Can you describe the way and the effect that language has when used by a writer? I think it's because it's so important. It's actually, central to the idea of studying language. They do it on the two. They spread it between the two papers so that you're doing it once with a kind of a story, and then you're doing it the second time with non-fiction, and perhaps even the 19th century text. So it's different types of text that you're doing your language analysis on. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
So the storm took control. Again, they're talking about it being a noun. So what does it mean? It suggests that something has been taken over and is like it can control anything it likes. Well, okay, that's right. So the storm is taking control. The writer has chosen this word to show that the storm has taken over. Well, that's what the word control means, isn't it? And to give the feeling as if you don't know what it will do next. That's interesting because it suggests that the idea that the storm is alive and is deliberately doing things. The person who's answering this can't quite put that into words. The point of the quote is that storms don't take control of things. It just happens. To take control is a deliberate action, and the storm doesn't take deliberate actions. So again, it's metaphorical. It's personification. It's like it's a monster or an enemy attacking, and monsters and enemies can take control, deliberately away from the climbers. And that's what's being done by the language here. It's making you feel as if they're under attack by something that thinks and does deliberate actions against them. It exaggerates the threat, or it makes you feel the threat more keenly. That's the effect of the language. Really, they're struggling here to explain what they feel, but they show a little bit of it in that last bit, which is why the examiners have given them some marks for it.
Is it fair to say that they give you is it a paragraph? And then it's about understanding the connotations of the words.
Yes.
Really. So
The connotations and the effects of the
Yeah.
words. Yeah. And that's why they only give you a little bit to look at. In this case, 10 lines, sometimes much less than that, in order for you to pick it out and then say a lot about a little. Yeah. So again, where they've missed the marks here is they use these lovely words: ripping, blinding, engulfing, and they say it shows how devastating the weather is. But how does it show that? Remember the bullet, my magic bullet? That is what it's showing, yes, but it's not explaining it. Ripping, blinding, engulfing. These are powerful words. What's the effect of them? You can almost, ripping is onomatopoeic. Rip. They're going through the tent. The wind is going through the tents and tearing them apart. Blinding people. Blinding the people by blowing the snow into their eyes. These are terrible effects. Engulfing, as if you're completely enclosed by the snow and it may never let you go. There's a lot of powerful meaning between these three words. You could get a whole paragraph just talking about those three words. You could got a paragraph of talking about fury and how a storm, which is just a natural event, can be furious, can have these emotions, these aggressive, terrifying emotions. Why did the writer put those emotions onto this natural occurring event? Because he wants to bring it alive, make it feel more threatening, make it feel that, wow, yes, it must have been terrifying. It turns it into a horrific personal experience rather than just a statement of what happened, a statement of fact. Yeah.
So could you say the writer has made it more than what it actually is?
Yeah, because
You could say that.
he does this to heighten the effect. The effect on the reader is to give you a thrilling, you know, terrifying, exhausting experience, something like what it must have been like to be there. Yeah, that sort of thing. You know, it's like the
Okay.
writer wants you to feel it as well as understand it. And we tend to think that non-fiction is all just about telling people facts, and it isn't. So when you read something like this, no, he wants you to feel and understand emotionally what it must have been like, because he drags you through it a bit by forcing you to understand through the use of imagery. And it's one of the only things you can do in order to give people a heightened experience through writing. What does the examiner say about this bit? So 5 marks, some understanding of language, attempts to comment on the effects of language, some use of appropriate textual details, some use of subject terminology, like the noun, adverb, verb, and so on. But then they've given this. In the first sentence, the candidate selects ripping, blinding, engulfing, and says this shows how devastating the weather is. This is an attempt to comment on the effects of language. These 3 words are not, in fact, one quotation, but come from 3 separate places in the text. So it's not a quote. Ripping, close quotes, open quotes, blinding, close quotes, open quotes, engulfing, close quotes. So this actually is an example of these are words that the writer uses to describe the storm. Yeah, that's great. You don't have to. You can have 3 separate little quotes like that. It's like you can say this is word choice, yes, or Lexis or whatever. But don't create a quote that shouldn't be there. There's nowhere in the text where there's a sentence that has ripping, comma, blinding, and engulfing, close quote. That doesn't exist. Now, rather than considering their effect collectively, the response could have been improved by analysing the effect of each word individually. So in fact, if they'd gone into real detail, they could have got a paragraph out of ripping, a paragraph out of blinding, and a paragraph out of engulfing if they'd wanted to. I mean, I think they could have, they still could use the 3 of them together, but they haven't really gone into the meanings and the effects of those 3 words. You know, why is ripping a really good word to use in this particular context? I don't know where that's gone. Sorry. Let's have a look at a really good one. So I think a really good one would be anything over 10. But this one's worth the full banana. 12 marks for this one. How does the writer use language to describe the storm? The writer uses a semantic field, right? So semantic field is the very posh version of what I call word choice. Just word choice is just easier to remember. If you like semantic field, that's great. And this is very similar to what the one we've just looked at says. Yes, a semantic field about violence verbs, right? To describe the storm. Whipped, plunging, ripping. They chose ripping, but others, but whipped, plunging, ripping. See, individual quotes because they come from different parts of the text. This is used to emphasize the danger, deadliness, and brutality of the storm. Violent language is used throughout the extract to emphasize that the storm was continuously violent and there was no respite. This implies there was no visible end to the storm. Yeah. So actually there you're getting clear explanation of effects of the language, clear understanding what the language is doing in terms of meaning. Yeah. Could it go further? Yes, it could, because actually you could say that, you know, it's actually giving intention to the storm in a poetic, metaphorical way, but you don't have to have everything. This point is emphasized by the writer's use of the quote, ripping into the tents in a blinding fury of snow, which demonstrates the strength and might of the storm while also implying that nowhere is safe. Now, this stuff here, which is about the tents would have been designed to withstand harsh weather and all that, the examiners clearly haven't been interested in that information because it's not actually about language. The interesting bit would be to go back into this and say, you know, look at the word fury. Is it ripping into the tents and a blinding fury actually suggests that the storm is doing it on purpose. And if it's doing it on purpose, then that is the writer putting intention into something that is not alive. It is personification. It is bringing to life the storm as if it were a mighty monster that's threatening and destroying the camp and threatening to kill the campers. It turns it into almost like a horror story, you know, to get our fear levels up, to make us really feel for what's going on there. And I think they've missed that trick. But nevertheless, they got full marks. So why did they get full marks? Aha. Because in the next one, they do talk about personification, which is a clear use of terminology. Personification is also used by the writer to show the storm's strength. It had the northern side in its grip, and the storm took control. The first quote compares the storm to a person with a mountain in their grip. This implies that the storm must be colossal to hold a mountain, and that to have it firmly in its grip, it must have copious amounts of strength. The second quote compares the storm to a captain or pilot that has taken control of the situation and is now able to decide what happens. This implies that the storm has great power, as somebody who takes control of a situation generally shows power and authority. Now, it doesn't make 100% sense, because to say it's like a person, but then it's a person obviously who can hold a mountain in their grip. It's obviously bigger than a person. So surely it's more like a monster, but that doesn't matter. This is what they call an attempt. It's a beginning to analyze the effects of language. And they're trying to make it clear to the examiner what they mean about what they think the writer is doing with the language. So the second one compares the storm to a captain or a pilot who has taken control of the situation. That's one way of talking about taking control. It makes it much more of a personal explanation. Yeah. And the fact that the storm shows power and authority is a very coherent explanation. You have to do it in your own style, of course, but this is showing a good deal of subtlety. Finally, the writer uses allusion to mythology. Now, this is wow. This is where they started to really go, ooh. So, sophisticated use of subject terminology, allusion to mythology. So basically, they're using language which comes from mythology. The writer shares that Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, and Nemesis, the Greek goddess of retribution, had joined forces. They could not have done a better job of devastation than nature itself on that day. This implies that the storm has greater power than two gods joining forces. Yeah, and that is an explanation of what is there. The writer's use of bathos, right, emphasizes this, where he says, could not have done a better job. The use of bathos implies that the high and mighty gods have been outdone by a simple act of nature. Bathos, does anybody know what bathos means?
No, I've never even heard of bathos.
Okay. If you don't, it's probably not time to start learning it, you know, because one, you're unlikely to come across it, and two, you know, unless you've been used to using it, you'll make a mess of it. Don't worry about it. But in a nutshell, bathos is what happens when you have a sudden drop from the high to the low in terms of what you're talking about and the way you're talking about it. So in this case, He starts out by talking about the storm as if it were Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, and Nemesis, the Greek goddess of retribution. So these great high references to mythology and religion, making that comparison between the mighty storm and these mighty gods, which is very high level, and arty, and showing their learning. And then could not have done a better job of devastation. Could not have done a better job is what we say about somebody's done some wallpapering and they go, oh, I couldn't have done a better job myself. That's not what we tend to say when we're talking about the deeds of mighty gods and mythological beings. There is a definite drop between the high level references and this rather everyday, almost jokey reference. And that drop, which actually produces a form of humor in this case, the word for that is bathos. All right. But I don't know, this learner had obviously learned all their terminology and they got a chance to use it. So, wow, okay, kudos to them. So the bathos emphasizes that, it implies that the high and mighty gods have been outdone by a simple act of nature. I would disagree with that slightly, but yeah, they've made a really interesting attempt at a high level piece of literary analysis, which is, probably at university level rather than GCSE level in this case. And that's why they maxed out on their marks. Not everybody can do that, and it does really depend on what text you've got in front of you. Sometimes you give you text where you're really working to find any interesting language to talk about at all. That has happened. You go, what on earth? You end up just talking about, their use of repetition or something, and rather than really meaty metaphors and similes, sometimes there just isn't there in the text for you. So a lot of it's luck what you can talk about. But I wouldn't worry about, too much terminology. It's more about whether you can, in your own words, describe what you think the writer is doing. But hopefully you can see the difference there between a 5 and a 12. So before we move on this one, let's just remind ourselves of what the examiners say about the language questions. Okay, now one of the differences, as well as the number of marks, is that there are no bullet points to help you on this one. There were bullet points on question on question 2 on paper 1, and the bullet points said things you can mention in your answer, things you can talk about: words, phrases, language features, and sentence structure. All right. This time there isn't that, so you have to just know what you're going to write about. So that makes it a little bit more difficult, but it is exactly the same. And the examiners only want you to talk about examples of language. They want you to talk about words, phrases, language features. They don't want you to talk about sentence structure. They say just focus on language, and language is words. All right, words with meanings, words with connotations and connections, language features that build images. They don't want you to talk about, oh, it's a short sentence or it's a long sentence. They really don't. That's what the examiners say, despite everything else. So I would listen to them personally. 3 examples is the ideal, but with with 2 really good, deep analysis of language, you can get most of the marks. Even though this question is worth more marks than paper 1, question 2, it's gone from 8 to 12, you do not need to give more answers. You simply need to go more in depth. Higher level candidates will give more in-depth responses. I'm sorry about this language where they talk about higher level and lower level and all that. But basically, people who are looking for a pass, you know, grade 4 or 5, you can be happy to aim for the 8. You know, don't worry about the 12, just aim for the 8 or get as high up towards the 8 as possible, just by doing what you did on paper 1. There's an emphasis on feelings and the effects of language. How does the language use make you feel? How has the writer used language to affect the reader? And that can be both you reading it now, or it can be the original audience. Let's say it's the 19th century piece of writing. How might that have affected the original audience? Would it have been more shocking? Would it have been more exciting? Would it have been easier to understand? You know, think about the gap between reading it 100 years later or reading it at the time. Again, that is for the higher level marks. Only use subject terms if relevant, and only use them if you understand them. Don't throw in terms, subject terms, if you just don't know what they mean. Don't just suddenly just go, boom, oh, that's onomatopoeia. You have to show that you know what they mean. So even if you use the word onomatopoeia, you still have to say, because it imitates the sound of the raindrops falling into the river that you would hear if you were there. You still need to put it in your own words to show the examiner you know what they mean. They say they hate lists of language features. They hate the lists. They hate the deforest written down the side of the paper, and you make sure you try and get every single one of them. They don't like that. So if you're going to use deforest, don't write it on the exam paper. Write it on the insert, but don't overuse them. One or two, subject terminology words. One or two will be more than enough. There's only like 1 mark for them anyway on both papers. But just talking about verbs and adverbs and adjectives may be enough to get top marks. Just actually saying this word, in this quote, this word, and talking about that word, just calling it a word, that will get you marks. Any other questions about question 3 before we look at question 4? Okay.
Sorry.
So
How
go on.
long have we got to answer this question? It's about 15 minutes, is it?
If you're going for the full 12 marks, 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, thank you.
If you're going for like a really solid answer, aiming for the 8 marks, then you can bring it down a bit to 10. Just depends how much you want to write and how much time you want to spend on it. And a lot of that depends on how much time you're going to spend on question 4. And there is a big question mark over how much time you should spend on this. So let's have a look at question 4.
Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, I raised my hand. I don't think you
I
saw
can't
me.
see that. Yeah, I can see it now, but I can't always. So you're best shouting at me.
Okay. I wanted to ask about question 3.
Yeah.
Do we have to talk about the tone of the narration or something like that?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Language, just language.
Just language. Okay.
Yeah, on this one. Yeah.
And 3
language.
paragraph.
Yeah, well, 3 examples of
3
language,
examples, yeah.
and you can write the answers in paragraphs if you want to, P paragraphs. You make a point, you explain it, and you talk about and you've got an example to talk about.
Okay.
But there is no marks on section A for how you do the writing. There's no marks for style. There's no marks for spelling or punctuation or grammar. So if you want to write your answers in note form or with headings or whatever, if it makes sense to you and it makes it clear what you're trying to say, there are no marks deducted for that as long as you clearly make your points. Okay. You don't have to write it as a classic essay. They're not asking you to do that.
Yeah. No.
Some people do that, and that's how they think and that's how they express themselves, and that's fine. But if it makes sense to you to do it in a different style, then there's no rules against that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's have a look at question 4. I'll start with the notes. And we have had some, discussions about question 4. It is the most difficult question. So this question is about the writers. It's not about language. It is about the writers. It's about their points of view. So this is non-fiction. The writers have written these pieces of text for a purpose, and they are showing their opinions, their points of view. And this question talks about those points of view. This question also, you must write about the ideas and perspectives of the writers and the methods they use to show them. So what are the writers' ideas, perspectives, points of view about the particular subject in the question? Plus, how do they show them? By using techniques and methods. Those techniques and methods can be structure or language. Okay? But you must do both because the question is about both. You can focus on 3 differences of the writer's points of view. You are asked to compare. So one of the writers might think that the weather is beautiful and lovely and it's a wonderful experience, and the other writer is telling you about how terrifying and deadly and horrific it is. That's clearly a difference in perspective. One of them is just sort of going for a little walk through the park in the snow. The other is halfway up Mount Everest and in actual fear of death. That's a very big difference in points of view. So you're basically talking about what are the writers' different points of view. Now, how do the writers get that point of view across to us? What methods do they use? And those methods could be they use metaphors and imagery. It could be that they use structural things like repetition or sentences that stand out by themselves or whatever. Whatever it is, you've got to say the writer shows this point of view, and in order to show that, they use this method, and then you give an example of that method. The sort of methods we're talking about can be language, metaphors, similes. This is where you can talk about tone. Does the whole piece of writing have a really scared, terrified, dark tone? Or does it have a happy, light, pleasant tone? Does the writer use humor? Does the writer use shock? Almost like horror descriptions. Those are the sorts of things we talk about as being method. Or it can be to do with structure. How the beginning slaps you in the face, or the ending is a shock ending, or whatever. How do the changes of focus work to make you sit up and take notice? Maybe words and sentences are out there on their own in order to be really focused on. So anything you talked about when you talk about analyzing the language on question 3 could be used in here. We don't look at structure on this paper, but structure features are techniques. Any techniques that the writer uses can be used as examples of methods. What the examiners want you to do on this question is to identify the authorial intention. That's what the authors actually meant to do, and the methods they used in order to do it. 2 sides of the same coin. What did the writers want to do? How did they do it? So you are comparing the methods and the perspectives. So it's 2 sets of comparisons. So you are required to talk about the effect of the text on the reader, and that can be the original reader or yourselves, and higher level candidates might make a reference to the original readers specifically. Finally, something that shocked us at the time, the examiners said, look, people could spend half an hour on this question and get 4 marks, 4 or 5 marks for half an hour of the exam. If that is you, I'm not saying it is, but if it is you, you might want to think, do you need to do this question? Because 4 marks and wasting half an hour on it, you might be able to use that half an hour much better, particularly on question 5. You know, going back over your questions and see if you can get an extra mark there, an extra mark there. You might actually use your time better not to do question 4 at all. And that's why the examiners use these words, not me. They said, do not get bogged down in this question. If in doubt, leave it out. Now, that really is quite shocking to hear the examiners say, leave out a question, but they really meant it. If you know from doing your mocks and doing your homeworks that you are never going to get more than a very small mark for this particular question, you may want to think about, well, how much time do I want to spend on it? Maybe I spend 5-10 minutes on it and see if I can get the easy marks. Just do a very quick comparison between, well, he thinks this, but he thinks that. He uses a metaphor, he uses a simile. Quote, quote, boom. You know, move on. Doing that can probably get you up towards 8 to 9 marks quite quickly. And then just leave it alone and go on to and use your time better elsewhere. If you need to get grade 9, grade 8, grade 7, if you need to get those high grades, not just want, if you need, then you do have to make the most of this question, because this question is worth 16 marks. It's a personal choice. Okay. Let's have a look at what is actually involved in the question.
I've got a question here.
Yeah.
For instance, some text, once you read initially, maybe first 2 paragraphs,
Yeah.
the writer may have a negative feeling,
Yeah.
or negative perspective. As the text progresses in the middle somewhere, you might get some positive feeling somewhere. Yeah, for instance, we read in the class about a girl who was going to holiday with his parents, which she did not actually like a holiday. She talked bad about holiday because her mother probably might have convinced her to go, but
Yes.
she didn't like it. But somewhere in the paragraph, when they went, she enjoyed only what made her, she stated what made her happy was when she got to the river or the lake, when she started skimming stones. That was the only thing, made her happy. So looking at her perspective in this, it seems overall it was negative throughout. Only that point that was positive. So when you are talking about perspective of the writer, maybe in first 2 paragraphs it might be somewhere positive, and then the middle is negative. Is it good to use paragraph where he says positive and where he says negative?
Right. I would say it's not just good. It's not just good. It's necessary. Because if you were to miss out, if you were to say, she was very, very negative about the holiday, and that's her point of view, and then you show different methods that the writer used to show how negative it was, and you do not mention that actually there was a part of the holiday she really loved, then you haven't shown that you've completely understood the piece of writing. So if there is a change of point of view, if the writer has different perspectives, then you should try and show those different perspectives. Definitely. And the examiners will be expecting you to.
Yeah, to make different paragraphs, I mean.
Yes. So have a paragraph about how generally, how much she hated the whole holiday or most of the holiday, and talk about that. But then you can say, but there was one part of the holiday that she really loved, and that's her perspective on that. And then you go into the skipping stones bit. You should try and show all the attitudes and ideas and perspectives of the writer. And quite often they do this, there is a change. And if the people who miss the change, the people who only talk about one point of view of the writer when actually there are at least two, they're going to have their marks cut because you didn't pick up on the fact that the writer had more than one perspective. Because sometimes they'll say the writer's perspectives, and that doesn't just mean between A and B, it also means maybe the writer of A has more than one perspective as well. Yeah. So if there is a change, if there are different ideas and points of view within one piece of text, you need to talk about it, definitely. Thank you for raising that. Good.
Thank you.
Can people see the PowerPoint about paper 2 question 4? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So looking at what's involved in the question, we've said this. Yeah, you're talking about the writers. It's their views, their points of view, their perspectives, and it is also the methods they use to show those views and perspectives.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. By the writers, you mean the protagonist
No,
of the
no,
story?
I don't mean the protagonists. Be very careful. What they mean here is the person who wrote the text. Now that could be the protagonist. You know, if it's a first person narrative, you know, like the one about the storm, the guy who's writing it is up the mountain and he's talking about his experiences. But he also talks about the experience of the woman who's at the bottom. Now, it's not about her point of view, it's about his point of view.
Okay.
You might get a piece of writing which is about a person, but it's not that person who wrote the text. And it's sort of like a biographical piece in which a writer is talking about a historical figure, maybe. It is not the views of the historical figure, it's the views of the writer.
Okay.
Be very clear of that. It's about how did the writer write it and what were the writer's points of view. Yeah. So be clear, this is not a language analysis question. It simply asks you to compare the different views in the text, the views of two different writers, and maybe the different views of the same writer. The question is not just about the views, though. It's also, you must say, some of the methods they use to show those views or those attitudes. So there's a format to this question. It says you should compare the different attitudes and you should compare the methods used to show the attitudes. So it's, what are the attitudes? Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they terrified? Do they hate something? Do they love something? And how does the writer present those attitudes? Through a particular technique. So they show how much they love the flowers through using similes and metaphors. Or they show how terrified they are by creating image or by using word choice, which is very, very negative, you know, and horrifying. That's what you're doing here. And obviously, you would have to have a quote. So if you say they use a metaphor, your quotation must be the metaphor. It uses the word convey. It says, how does the writer convey their views or opinions or attitudes? And convey simply means methods of showing. So what are the methods that the writer uses? That's what it means by convey. It means the writer's techniques. When it talks about points of view, it may not use those words. It might use the word perspective, but it can use any words, but they're all the same thing. This is just some of them. Look, it might say, talk about the writer's outlook, their views, their viewpoints, their points of view, their standpoints, their positions, their stands, their stances, their attitudes, their frame of mind, their frame of reference, their approach, their ways of looking, their interpretations. You can use any of those. But basically, it's the same thing. What is their point of view on the theme or the subject in the question? So what is their attitude to fox hunting? You know, maybe the two stories that the two texts have very different views on fox hunting. So how does the writer convey those different points of view? And it could be, what is their attitude to fox hunting? It could be, what is their stance on fox hunting? There is a slight difference in those meanings. Attitude might be, I absolutely hate it and disapprove it morally. And on the other hand, I think it's part of everyday country life and it's a great tradition that should be protected. Those are two very different points of view on fox hunting. And then you're going to say, how have they put those points of view and attitudes across using methods? Again, it's quite good to make a point, explain your point and evidence. So make a point about writer A, explain your point and evidence. But in this case, you're doing slightly more than that. So this is an example of a possible format. Your book, your textbook gives a different way of doing it. You might find others online, but all of them are good as long as you're clear. But this is my version. Basically, I say in the first half of the paragraph, say the writer of source A has this perspective, and you say what the perspective is negative about it, is fearful about it, is angry about it, or whatever. He or she uses a method, this method, to show this perspective. But you wouldn't say this method, you say uses tone of voice, uses metaphor, uses simile to show how angry they are about fox hunting. And then your quote is it's the example of them using that metaphor or whatever the method is you're talking about. And that is source A. And then because it's the differences, you would say, in contrast, on the other hand, however, the writer of source A has this different perspective. They actually think that fox hunting is really a valuable countryside tradition and should be preserved. He or she creates imagery in order to show how positive the fox hunting is. Yeah. And you would give an example of him or her doing that in your quote. You don't need to explain the quotes. You simply need to have the quote to back up what you've just said. And because you've put on the other hand or however in the middle, that is a contrast. And I would say do that once, do it twice, and if you can, do it 3 times. And then you've actually fully covered the question. But even if you only do it once or twice, you've shown that you have done a contrast between the two writers. You have mentioned their perspectives and ideas. You have also mentioned their methods. And you must do both. So if you only talk about their ideas, or if you only talk about their methods, maximum you can get is half marks because you've left one half of the question out. Let's very quickly look at an example because I want to get on to question 5. So let's have a look at a reasonably, I don't want to look at a very, very high level example for this one. I want to look at a reasonable example. So question 4, something that's achievable for everybody. So this one is worth 8 marks. Let's go for a bit higher. This is a long one. Yeah, this one's worth just over half. This is worth 11 marks out of 16. This is a good sizable answer. But they have written an awful lot. So remember, they've spent half an hour probably writing this answer. Compare how the writers convey their different perspectives on the extreme weather conditions. So it's simply talking about the extreme weather conditions. What do they feel or think about that? Now, first thing they've done is they've written an introduction. They've actually introduced what the texts are. Absolute waste of time. There's nothing to be gained from doing that. It may feel like it's a nice way of starting, but you're not getting marks for how you present things. So that was just dead space. Leave it alone. Don't do that. Straight into what the question asks you. In source A, the writer views the situation with fear. Dickinson has many feelings of fear towards the storm, and we see this especially when he writes. So this is the writer's perspective. Fear towards the storm. And now an example. The apocalyptic vision crept silently and swiftly towards them. This shows a feeling of threat and that they feel very insignificant amongst such treacherous weather. So a clear understanding of the writer's ideas and perspectives. Yeah. Now, what they haven't done is they haven't identified a method. They've used a quote to show him using language, but they haven't identified a method. So going into the word apocalyptic is used to suggest the end of the world, and it emphasizes the power of the storm. It also shows that he feels threatened and terrified by the storm. So actually, that's a way, it looks like language analysis, and actually it could be. You could say that on question 3. But it's a way of explaining the method that's being used. You can say it's the choice of the word apocalyptic. That would be the word choice. You didn't therefore need this particularly. You could just say he uses he makes a word choice to use the word apocalyptic. The apocalyptic suggests the end of the world, emphasizes the power of the storm. You know, it's a big calamity, big catastrophe. So it shows how threatened and terrified he is. He literally thinks, you know, as well as metaphorically, that the world is ending. And that really sums up his feelings as he's taken over by the storm. Now, on the other hand, source B, that is a clear comparison. On the other hand, source B is a far more positive outlook on the snow. Clear comparison. Positive is a different point of view. Negative to positive is a change of perspective. Munby shows himself to be very appreciative of the beauty of the snow, and it makes him happy. We see this when he says picturesque and antique. Now, he could have said, uses positive words like picturesque and antique. He has kind of missed out the method there. These are examples of words, but he hasn't said what they are. You know, you need to identify a method, but you only need really to have done it once or twice. Source A presents Dickinson feeling vulnerable because of the storm. He seems very intimidated by the storm. Tempestuous roar. This uses animals to help emphasize the danger. What he means is uses zootropism, or it uses an animal image or an animal metaphor to help emphasize the danger. Yes, the word tempestuous makes us think the storm is enormous and so on. And then on the other hand, source B, Munby appears to be delighting in the storm and thinks it's very beautiful. And this contrasts. So they get 11 marks. Now they make some very good basic comparisons between what the writer's feelings are towards the weather that they're talking about, and then examples of language being used. They don't really fully identify methods for both pieces of writing. So clear understanding of the writer's ideas and perspectives, yes. Understanding of the writer's methods in source A. Notice just in source A, the source B methods are not really fully explained, and they're not even really named. This response could have been improved by examining the writer's methods in source B. So if you're going to look at the writer's methods in source A, you must do so in source B as well. Also considering the negative aspects of the extreme weather. So this was an example of what Kwasi said. The first part of this of the text B talked about how lovely the snow was and how lovely London looks in the snow. But the second half talks about the poor young woman who's almost dying out there in the snow, and how dangerous it is for her because of exposure and so on, and poverty. That his concern and fear for the young woman is a complete change of perspective on the snow and the weather. And this answer doesn't mention that. It doesn't mention that actually Dickinson takes two different views based on his experiences. When he's just interacting with the snow, walking through the park and looking through his window, and when he's actually meeting a woman who has to live out in the freezing cold, that's different. And he takes a very different view then. And because it doesn't mention both, that's what limits this to 11 marks. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question again? Sorry, Graham. As yours.
So the
What was
question was
Yeah.
very
Was
simple.
it about? Was it
Yep.
differences?
Here it
then?
is. Can you see it? It says
Yes, I
compare
can.
how the writers convey their different perspectives on the extreme weather conditions. So, he's right most of the way through. One of them is terrified, frightened for their lives, impressed by the power, the rate, and so on. And the other one, it's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's a bit of fun, walking in the snow, yeah. But then there's the bit at the
Yeah.
end
So if we,
that says, but
but
what
if we-
about this woman who has to live out in the snow? No, and she's not been eating, and she's poor. She needs somewhere to shelter. I'm worried about her. I give her some money, but what's going to happen to her? That worry and concern is a new and different perspective, even within the same text, and needed to be mentioned.
But if we Yeah, I get that. But if you focus on that question where it says compare their different perspectives, you might
Yeah.
get hung up on that and literally just do the opposites and completely miss that the writer, like what you were saying, has shown two different
Yeah.
contrasting viewpoints because
Yeah.
that's not what the question's asking. So it's really
Well,
difficult in an
it
exam
says
situation.
they're different perspectives.
Oh,
Now,
okay. Yeah.
that perspectives means plural, yeah. The different perspectives
Yeah.
of writer A and writer B, but also any different perspectives that writer A has themselves. So they may have more than one perspective, and you
Okay.
should try and make it more than one. So even though, all right, he's generally fearful, but they're also the writer is also incredibly impressed by the power of the storm, and that's a different perspective. Even as he's thinking, I might die in this storm, he's thinking, look at the power, look at the force. It's magnificent. It's like he respects the storm, and that's a very different point of view. And for very high marks, that's kind of the level that you'd want to pick out on.
So
Whereas,
are you looking for a contrasting perspective to match that with the other text?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the other text, the old man actually feels that it's almost like artistry. It's beautiful. It's like a beautiful painting with the snow, and that's his positive feeling towards it. But there's also the danger that it inflicts on the poor, although not to the same degree, because he can give us some money, she can go and get some hot soup. Whereas nobody can help those poor people who are being swept away in the storm. The death and destruction of A is much bigger and more deadly than in source B.
Oh, that's really helpful. So to look out for that change in perspectives and not just have, right, I'm with you.
No.
Yeah.
Don't presume it's just one perspective in A and one perspective in B. If there are two discernible ones, make sure you mention them.
Oh, that's helpful.
I've got a question
Great.
there.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that the first one, I don't know if source A or B, whatever, about the woman. Also, that it's obvious or evident about the change of focus from how the beautiful the snow was to the woman suffering. But about the Everest one, so it's quite hard. It's all easy to miss out, because when you're talking about how powerful a storm is, and then the power, it's naturally we don't actually appreciate because of the devastating effect that it has on property or on nature or on our lives. So it's so easy. So because when I'm reading that text, obviously, I'm going to think of the whole text talks about the negative
Yeah.
perspective of it. So how in a text like this, because the first one, the change of focus is obvious, but the second one is hard to identify.
It
that
is,
kind of,
yes. And because it's hard, you have to work a little bit harder to explain it, and you will be credited more for trying to do that. Nobody's expecting it to be perfect. The examiners are looking for potential and for attempting to explain the more sophisticated ideas that might be in there. Yeah. So it's making an attempt, putting it into your own words. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We're going to move on. I would say if you are hung up on question 4, remember I did a whole session on it. So do look back at the video for that and the PowerPoint for that. I'd like to now look at question 5 briefly. The one thing I would say about this, and the examiners say about it, look, it's meant to be factual, yes, because it's meant to be your opinion that you're talking about. So if we look at this one, snow seems like it is picturesque, exciting and fun, but in reality it causes accidents, inconvenience and economic disruption. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this issue. Now, it's your point of view. Yes, you're talking about your point of view, and you're using methods to show your point of view. You can use this statement just as you use the photograph in question 5 on paper 1. Use it as the spur to your imagination. You do not need to address it as if it were the examination question itself. You're not answering a question based on that statement. You're trying to write an article for a newspaper. You're trying to be entertaining and interesting for newspaper readers. So just take it as a start. Anything you write, they will mark, and they're not really that interested in whether you've actually answered all these bits. However, what is good about this statement is you can use it as a quick plan. So actually, look, is it picturesque? Is it exciting? Is it fun? Right, so that can give you 3 points you want to make about the snow. Or you can use these. It causes accidents, inconvenience. So you've actually got 3 on both sides, haven't you? You're only talking about your point of view. It doesn't ask you to be balanced. It doesn't ask you to address both sides. So actually, you can either use, I'm going to say that snow is great. It's great because it's picturesque. That's my first paragraph. It's great because it's exciting. Give an example. And it's great because it's fun. Look at the kiddies playing snowballs. And that can actually give you the content of my 3 explanation paragraphs. Or I could go the other way and say snow is a horrible and terrible event. Why? Question, paragraph 1 causes accidents. 2 causes inconvenience. What if you want to go somewhere or do something? It causes economic disruption because it brings the country to a halt. It stops workers getting into work. It stops. It closes down factories. So actually, you can take your paragraphs from the statement. If you're really stuck, you can just do introduction. Then I'm going to talk about how picturesque it is. Then I'm going to talk about how exciting it is. Then I'm going to talk about how fun it is. And then I'm going to do a conclusion. And that's my 5 paragraphs. If I'm pushed for time, I'm only going to take 2 of those and just do 4 paragraphs, as long as I've got a nice conclusion. With picturesque, I can actually go to town on doing descriptions. Look how beautiful the snow is, and actually write some metaphors and similes and great imagery about the snow. Yes, this is factual, but the factual part is it's your opinion. It's your point of view. I love snow. It is, and then the first paragraph, I love snow because it is so beautiful. It is so picturesque. And then give me some picturesque language. I love snow. That's the next paragraph. I love snow because it's so exciting. It's going skiing. It's going, snowboarding. Look, your adrenaline pumping. And I love snow because it's fun. Children love it. Building snowmen, everybody chasing around, playing snowball fights. It's fun. And then into your conclusion. Don't listen to the naysayers. Snow is wonderful, blah, blah, blah. So if you're stuck for what to write, use the actual statement as, like you would the picture, just take 3 things out of the statement and use those to base your paragraphs on. Don't worry too much about the form. You can write anything in the broadsheet newspaper comment piece. Have you read any? You should. You should read them. It's often just one person talking to you as if they're having a conversation, and they can do it in any form they like. There are no rules. The examiners say, don't worry too much about the form. As long as it's good writing, you can get top marks. It is not an academic question, even though it says explain your point of view. No, express your point of view, illustrate your point of view, bring your point of view to life and make it lively and interesting. And here's something you should never do. Look at the way they've started. This is meant to be a broadsheet newspaper. And it starts, to a certain extent, I agree with the statement for several reasons. Snow does look exciting and fun. What? Have you ever read a newspaper article like that? What statement? There is no statement. Look, the statement's in the question. It's not going to be printed at the top of the newspaper article, and then you're going to give your opinion about it. That never happens. If you're going to give a speech, you wouldn't read out a statement and then say, and I'm going to tell you why I agree with that. It's nonsense. Don't ever mention the statement. Use it, but never mention it. Start with something really good. Start with something that's going to grab the reader and make them want to read on. Think about openings. Why good openings make you want to read on. Start with shock. Start with humor. Start with excitement. Let's look at a good one. Don't bore the reader. That's the big one. This is a good one. Snow. The joy and or sorrow that floods into our bodies when we wake up in the morning to see that cars are camouflaged into the driveway by a wash of white substance. Snow. Thinking of endless things to do on our bucket list of the day, which somehow always manages to include the outdoors. Building a new friendly snowman before it melts into the ground later, sledging down a steep hill for a local exhilarating ride, and snowball fights with the ones you love. Snow. It somehow excites you and motivates you for the most common thing associated with the cold weather, Christmas time. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. Unless, of course, the snow randomly comes in April time, which is no surprise for the British weather. And Christmas Day, and ends up looking like any other normal day. The snow makes the day special, no matter what the occasion. Now, let's not bother about the rest of it. Look at this. You can see the examiners liked it because they've gone to town on it. Increasingly sophisticated vocabulary and phrasing, wide range of accurate punctuation. Great. But what they're really doing, what did you notice about this piece of writing?
The paragraphing.
Mm-hmm. So they'd forgotten to do.
Yeah, and ambitious words.
Yeah, ambitious words. So they're using good vocabulary, even if they spell the words wrong. They're trying to use a higher level vocabulary, and that gets more marks. So you get more marks for using good words than you do for spelling them wrong. Talk about the paragraphing. They actually forgot to write paragraphs at the beginning, and that's why they put in these parallel lines. Those lines mean, oh, I meant to put a paragraph there. That's what that means. And the examiner will read that as if that's a new paragraph because they put in that line, the // there means new paragraph. So if you have made a mistake and you haven't put it into proper paragraphs, go back and put your lines where they should be, and you will be credited for writing in paragraphs. But what have they done at the beginning of each paragraph?
Snow.
No,
Yeah.
no, they've done Oh yes, snow. Yeah, they've repeated, haven't they? But that sounds more like a story than a
Yep.
newspaper.
But remember, one of the very first non-fiction things that we read on the course, I have a dream. Do you remember that? Martin
Yes.
Luther King's speech. He wrote a speech and he punctuates it with the repetition, I have a dream. And each of the verses of his but I say verses because it is like a song. Each of the paragraphs starts, I have a dream. He, and yes, it is like a song. And it is incredibly powerful in that speech. Memorable. People remember I have a dream because of that. It's a way of linking it. It's a structure feature. It links it together. And so why not? You're meant to be writing an entertaining article about what you feel about snow. It's not a boring, factual, well, snow is made up of water, and blah, blah, blah. No, it's meant to be entertaining. So snow, the joy or the sorrow that floods into our bodies, snow. It somehow excites you and motivates you, and so on. It's like a chorus. Why not? Another great way of doing this is to use some rhetorical questions. Do you love snow? You know, I love snow because, and keep repeating it. I love snow, and then the next paragraph, I love snow. I just keep, just having those sorts of structural repetitions. It makes it all sound, like a story, like a song, like a poem. Why not?
So you can think of it like that then. Think of
Yes.
it as writing like a story, or even though it says you're writing like a
Because
newspaper article, but actually you can write it like a story, so
Yeah,
it flows.
because
and-
think about the non-fiction pieces that we've looked at as examples. They're very rarely really dull, factual, fact sort of things. They're usually full of good use of language. They're full of maybe entertaining in moments or deep emotional feelings. And yes, that's one way of putting across reality and fact is actually to make it as gripping and as entertaining as it would as if it were a fictional story. Use the techniques of literary writing in order to put across factual information. But in this case, because the form is almost always going to be asking you to express your opinion, when people express their opinions, what you want to express to the reader is how you feel and why you feel it. And the best way to do that is to make it real for them, to paint them pictures. The examiners also want to see you using language creatively. Even though it's factual stuff, they want creativity. They want like he says, cars are camouflaged into the driveway by a wash of a white substance. So using alliteration, using a little bit of metaphor, camouflaged into the driveway. It's an image. The cars are all covered in snow, and so they all blur. You can hardly see them against the background. It's a good image. It's a good little metaphor there. That's the way you should address this. Make it as entertaining and interesting and beautiful as you possibly can. And although this is celebratory, it can be just as good when it's negative and it's something bad. The horrors of being caught in a snowstorm, the terror of being in an accident because your wheels have slipped on the ice. Though that can be really brought to life incredibly dramatically. And just because it's dramatic doesn't make it non-fiction. Doesn't make it a fictional story. Because you could be describing a true experience. The other thing I need to say about this very quickly is, how true is this going to be? It's asked you to talk about your attitudes towards snow, or it could ask you to talk about your attitudes towards extreme sports. They did that one year. Me, I've got no attitudes towards extreme sports, except that I will avoid them in all cases. But actually, it's much more interesting if you say, I love being up there on the mountain, risking my life, experience the pumping adrenaline, the sweat runs down my face, blah, blah, and you really bring it to life. You can lie. Nobody's going to mark you down for actually making all this up. So when you say, oh, but it's a story, it's not real. Yeah, it can be. And you know what? The examiners don't care. The examiners are just looking at how well you've used language and how well you've written and how well you've expressed your an understanding. So this point of view could be entirely made up. Sometimes it's better to take on an extreme point of view. You know, you don't just mildly dislike buses, you hate them. I hate buses, you know, and you say why you hate them so much. Is much more interesting to read than, oh, well, they have their downsides. You know, that's too boring. You don't want to be boring. You want to be really exciting and grab the reader and pull them in. Yeah. This number 5 is really odd because they've actually said, dear editor of the newspaper. It didn't ask you to write a letter to the newspaper. It said write an article for a broadsheet newspaper. Why have they put it dear editor? You don't need that anyway. Just get rid of that. You know, you go straight into. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, as a newspaper article was the one that we looked at. What there wasn't any title or heading.
Yeah.
So a newspaper article.
Yeah.
Is necessary. It's necessary to put heading.
If you look, I mean, personally, I would put a title. You know, snow. It's brilliant. You know, or I hate snow, or something like that. You don't need to. You're only really writing the text of the article. Yeah, you're just writing the text of the article. It's like if they ask you to write a letter, just write the text of the letter. You can start dear whoever, but don't bother putting in addresses and things. You're not being marked on do you know the format of a letter. You're being marked on how well you write and how well you use language. So it's the text of the article that you're really being marked on. Remember, don't write too much. For this one, 4 or 5 paragraphs is plenty. Your first paragraph is a general introduction, then, you know, where you introduce the idea you're talking about. The idea could be, I hate snow, or it could be homework should be banned, or it could be this country is going to the dogs, whatever you want. And that's your big idea. And then now you're going to explain your big idea with different points of view, or not different points of view, different aspects. So paragraph 1 is going to be, well, I hate snow because it's disruptive. And paragraph 2 is going to be, I hate snow because it causes accidents. And paragraph 3 is going to be, I hate snow because it costs money. It's a drain on the economy. It closes down, you know, work, and it stops us all. I mean, a boring point of view, but there you go, right? And then your last paragraph is going to be your conclusion, where you make a big grand statement about what you believe, and you know, sort of go out on a high. So the first line should be really exciting and interesting. The last line should be really exciting and interesting. Remember, you're not being asked to write a balanced article. It doesn't have to be both sides of the point of view. It says your point of view. So you're not giving pros and cons. You're just saying what I think, what I believe. And the same goes whether you're writing a letter, writing a speech, writing in a blog, any of that. Just write the text and make it about your supposed opinions. Even if you don't have an opinion on the subject, just make one up, right? And concentrate on making your language as entertaining and interesting, funny, horrific, beautiful, but always descriptive. Lots of description. Any more quick questions, because it's getting on a bit.
So should we present some people's point of view, for example, if we're writing?
You can do. You can do that. Yeah.
So, for example, if I write about beautiful snow, so can I say that some people think that it's not very nice because, but I still, you know, think that
you could. And actually, remember, there are marks on this question for spelling, punctuation, and grammar, as well as vocabulary. So very high marks on punctuation would include using things like semicolons and speech marks. So if you want to actually bring in, you know, somebody else talking, so, you know, don't just listen to me, get an opinion from my next door neighbor. My next door neighbor says, and have an opinion from him or her. and you put them and you punctuate your speech. You punctuate your conversation very carefully. Then you'll get marks for higher level punctuation and so on. If, on the other hand, you always make mistakes with speech punctuation, I would leave it out. You don't want to show them something you can't do. Do a long list and use your commas and punctuation and colons and semicolons correctly. That's a way of showing off your punctuation. Most of the marks, though, are for language use and organization. So you really should write a plan and write it by, in the first paragraph this, in the second paragraph that, and so on. And I would suggest you base that on the statement. And the statement will give you at least 3 ideas that you can write good paragraphs on. Anybody else got a question on anything to do with paper 2 at this point?
Can we write down plan on the answer sheet?
Yeah, that's where you should write it. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. They like to see plans. There's always the outside possibility that if you run out of time and you don't finish, and I say don't do that, but if you do, and they see what you were going to write because you wrote it on the plan, they can always bung a mark in your direction. But basically, no, all you need to do is write the plan, just to make sure they know it's not part of the actual writing. You can put a single line through it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then. All the best. Good luck for next week. If you have any questions or you do anything you want me to look at it, just drop me an email. I'll be thinking about you. So thank you for coming. Thank those of you who've been coming all the way through.
Very much
It's
for your
been
time.
nice.
Thank you, Dr.
You're
Reed.
welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, then.
Thank
All
you.
the best and good luck.
And you too.
So
Bye-bye.
thank you for your session today. It was really helpful, and
You're very welcome.
enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Bye-bye, folks.
And
Bye.
happy retirement as well.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye.
thank you. Yeah, I will. Cheers.
Okay.